We're a small island and we control or endeavour to our population level, not only through job licences, and we've spoken quite a bit about that throughout these hustings, but also through housing control. And unfortunately, one of the unintended consequences of that, which I think you're absolutely right, there hasn't really been a light shone upon it, is the conditions which some individuals in our community living in that unqualified sector. And I've got to say, it's absolutely and completely unacceptable. As Francis has said, things are being done to alleviate that. Yes, there will be a tenancy deposit scheme. Yes, there will be security of tenure in the unqualified sector. The housing department perhaps has historically only really looked at social housing within our community. It now plans to, in a way, change its mission. Yes, it's going to ensure that social housing is appropriately invested in, but it will also turn itself into something much more strategic, so it can look at housing generally. And these are the very issues that it will need to address, and I know they're committed to addressing because I've been sitting on that transformation programme, and we absolutely, once and for all, have to say, no, these are issues which must be addressed. We cannot live with them anymore because it's unacceptable. Thank you.
Yes, the rights and the protection scheme essential. Obviously, it would help if we build properties to the higher building regulation standards of installation, damp-proofing, etc. First off. But I have to say, the other thing the state should do is set a decent example. £65 million behind on our housing repairs improvements. That's not an example to set to private landlords, is it? And that's causing a lot of the problems that we talked about there. And the other thing that I would suggest if our tenants we keep an eye out for is, whether you're qualified or non-qualified actually, is the long-term care proposals package and the funding for that. Because that 1.5% increase in social security contains an insurance element. Essentially, there will be a discount for house owners up to £750,000, but for tenants, not very much at all. And you're paying for that. So I take a look at those details when they come out by you.
I normally advocate less government involvement, but in this case, and the whole housing issue, I think we need more government involvement. I mean, we've got the crazy situation where we spend tens of millions of pounds on the rent development system for the qualified sector, and this is just money going into the landlord's pockets. I mean, surely this money would be better in the tenants' pockets, so that we can be out spending it in the shops. I mean, also with the luxury flats, I know you briefly mentioned that. We've got outside investors buying up luxury flats, collecting the rents, paying no tax over here. So, I mean, at the very least, we should have capital gains tax.
It was 1953 when the Landlords and Tenants Act was introduced to England and Wales. So why there's been no law in the 58 years since? Given that we're copying every other law from England, you have to ask the people who've been in power. Houses in Jersey are overvalued. An average family home, it would seem to me, should be affordable on an average family income. One of the problems I am aware of is that it's very expensive for people once their children have left home. There's no motive to move out of your 4-bedroom house and into a smaller property because the price of the 2-bedroom flats are so expensive. And then when you look at why they're so expensive, it's that they are set by the level of accommodation allowance on income support. It is possible to buy a flat, let it out to someone on income support, receive the subsidy from the government, and that will pay your mortgage and make you a reasonably good profit. The biggest thing we can do is actually to reduce demand, and I'm afraid for that we need to bring in some form of immigration control which will remove people from the island. If we remove the pressure from the market, well, the market itself will drive bad landlords out of business. Thank you.
Far too expensive. They're like rabbit hutches. A lot of places are substandard, because I've seen some of them. There used to be a protection scheme whereby the rents would be knocked down if the properties were inspected and they weren't up to standard. They were not allowed to charge the same rent. That scheme I would think of bringing back in for sure. In that respect, we've got to look after people. We can't have people living in damp and nasty accommodations, and greedy people upping and upping and upping the rent. But of course the problem with this is, we had a housing department that said we should try and put the housing rents up to match the private sector. So the private sector goes up. All of the properties are in disrepair and people don't care, provided they get that in their pocket. We need more people in the States who are not interested in making a profit and what they can do behind closed doors. We need people who are going to represent the actual real people and say, no, enough is enough. Go to the houses, take a look, go to the department, make the landlord repair it or have less rent or have not allowed to be using it at all. If it's not fit for habitation, then it shouldn't be used. So that they put it to rest.
Good question. I thought this substandard accommodation was a thing of the past, but I've been hearing a lot during this election campaign about an enormous number of accommodation areas that were substandard, especially in the agricultural area. And I really do think we need to protect these people through an inspector and a tenancy protection scheme and all the other facets you would need to protect these people. It is ridiculous in this day and age that people should have to live in substandard accommodation. As for agricultural workers, I should say there will be loans available for years to do it. Why they did like that, I do not know. And I would suggest if there's any farmer around the place, they go and look at the Galleys place where he's built carbon-free accommodation for his tenancies, and it's absolutely fantastic. Certainly, those loans are available for agricultural workers. They should be a loan to the private sector as well. Thank you.
This question strikes a chord with me because I spent 14 years as a councillor in inner London, and every week I would see people who lived in appalling, often council-owned housing. Now, when I first came to Jersey, I didn't dream that there would be similar problems in Jersey, but clearly there are, and many of them who suffer those conditions are the most vulnerable in our community, and many of them live not just in the countryside, but many of them live in St Helier. And that is a disgrace to our society. Having said that, I would certainly, and I have tried to do so with Francis through the CAB, press absolutely for a tenancy deposit scheme. I simply cannot understand why we don't have one. I actually think that is a scandal. But also I think we need to go further. It is not right that people should be tenants and they don't have basic security of tenure, tenancy rights. It's not right that they can't get their repairs carried out. And I think this is one of the issues in Jersey that is very often not spoken about. So I'm very, very grateful that you've raised it as an issue this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very good question. Yes, I am not happy about this. I am rather embarrassed that such a wealthy island, we still have people suffering under these conditions. It is wrong. We urgently need legislation to introduce. We urgently need legislation to introduce security and protection for tenants. Family affordable homes, and I'm not necessarily talking about large 4 and 5 bedroom homes, small, appropriate, family affordable homes need to be built, and we need to reintroduce something similar to the old state's loan scheme, which saw many hundreds, if not thousands, of local families put a foot on the housing ladder. And this scheme, the repayment of any loan or funding to help families get onto the ladder would be no more onerous than a reasonable rental commitment. You asked what I would do if elected. I would try and persuade the appropriate departments and politicians leading those departments to bring the necessary legislation. If I was not successful at that, I would have no hesitation in bringing private members' propositions to introduce the necessary laws. Thank you.
This is something very dear to my heart because when I was manager of the Citizens Advice Bureau, I campaigned for years for a tenancy deposit protection scheme. But there is good news around the corner. The states have approved a draft residential tenancies law,
under which regulations will allow for the holding of tenants' deposits, and under the Control of Housing and Work law, which is a new law that's we recently approved, a non-qualified person in a residential unit, as defined in the Residential Tenancies Law, will have security of tenure. So there is good news coming. Also, the Health Department are looking at a law to look at standards in lodging house and private lodgings. So there is things coming, but it's taking an enormous amount of time. But I can assure you and other people here who are concerned on these issues, it's matters that are already being dealt with by the state, and new members will not have to bring their own propositions. Thank you.
I can promise you that I will attempt to address all of the issues that you've mentioned in your question, because I already plan, if I'm successfully elected, to bring a proposition to the State Assembly. And let me explain to you what that would be and why. Let me ask you, what do you think the second largest industry in Jersey is?
Accommodation.
Got it in one. This is the elephant in the room. It's never ever spoken about, ever. In the States, in any of the discussions about taxation or economic policy, you never hear it mentioned. The second largest economy in Jersey, the second biggest part of our economic activity after finance, is the accommodation industry. Now that industry, in the whole, needs a detailed strategic appraisal. Its roles economically, how it conducts itself, its power, its lobby, its interests. Is it actually serving the good of the community? Do we actually get sufficient tax take on it? Too much owned outside of the island? Are people in Jersey treated fairly? Can ordinary people actually afford to live in their island without being exploited, without ever hoping to get a foot on the property ladder? The state has never ever looked at it as an industry and undertaken that strategic appraisal of its role and its conduct. If I'm elected, I promise you I will take a proposition seeking to do that. Thank you.
This is a huge problem for which we need a radical solution. And at the core of it is the fact that in Jersey we have very low rates of home ownership. The island plan set out to try and find a way of resolving this issue, and we have already delivered the Home Buy scheme, which delivered affordable houses for sale to over 100 islanders. The island plan provides for another 1,000 houses. Of those, 500 would be for sale at discounted prices, and 500 for permanent rental at discounted prices. But I can assure you that passing it in the island plan is not the end of it. It will need robust politicians to remain committed to ensuring we deliver those 1,000 affordable homes over the next 10 years. But they can be delivered. Thank you.
Like all the candidates on the platform, I'm sure I am ashamed of a situation where a minority of landlords exploit the vulnerability of tenants, particularly unqualified tenants. The solution is not easy. I think that these things flourish in darkness, and that some spotlight ought to be placed upon them, because when these things are exposed, it's much easier to find a solution. I remember that many years ago there was a scandal about the standard of accommodation in the agricultural industry, and it was given a great deal of publicity. And the result of that was that standards in the agricultural industry, while maybe not perfect, have certainly gone up a great deal. The other thing that I think needs to be said is that we should do something about the ownership of homes in Jersey. The percentage of people owning their own property in Jersey is 60%, whereas in the UK and even in Guernsey it is 70%. We ought to resuscitate our state's loan scheme to make it possible for young people in particular to get their foot on the housing ladder. Thank you.
I have seen this situation regarding housing from several angles. When I first came to Jersey and decided to settle here, I lived in a room 11 foot 2 by 10 foot 10 for 2 years. The place was rotten with mould, and there were gigantic spiders with bodies the size of mice, so you can appreciate it. Not that that's the case. However, I suffered the hell on earth, overcame the fact that I had no qualifications, and as a result of slamming it, gained my qualifications legally. My other take on it is that I have become aware of the fact that local people and residentially qualified people have been offered places in which to live within lodging houses, whereby the owner of the property retains a key to their room or rooms, and they can come and go as they please. That is wrong. All qualified people should have their key to the door. Where owners are concerned, I owned a guest house, let it to sleepers during winter months because I had to pay my massive mortgage, and I found so much unbelievable damage with carpets wrecked within 2 days of the girl moving in there. That was a brand new carpet, incidentally. She lost her peppercorn deposit, 100